Hello, I'm Katrina Canyon, Executive Director of Peace Economy Project. Thank you for joining us today. Today, we will be talking to our senior fellow, Rashell Khan, on militarization, democracy, and peace building. Uh, Rashell, thank you for joining us. Can you tell our viewers a little bit about yourself and what brought you to Peace Economy Project?
Sure, thank you for having me on. I'm a human rights attorney by trade. I graduated from Cornell Law School in 2013, and I worked briefly as a prosecutor in upstate New York before moving back home to California. And I stumbled upon the Peace Economy Project on Idealist while I was looking for work, and it just seemed like a really interesting organization to me, and they were looking for an international law fellow, and most of my work and background is in international human rights law. So I applied, and I've been with you guys for almost a year, and it's been a very rewarding experience.
Can you tell us what first sparked your interest in issues like justice, peace building, and public policy?
Well, I've been interested in human rights more generally since I was a teenager. I think 9/11 and the subsequent war on terror are what really sparked my interest. As a Muslim American, it was very immediately relevant to me, the civil liberties, both domestic and international. And once I actually started working with PEP, I was really impressed by the message of building a peace economy in order to divert funds away from military spending. I didn't know very much about nonproliferation before I started my research, but I've learned a lot, and it's just obscene how much money we spend on destructive elements.
Yeah, exactly. And it has motivated a number of our fellows to help join our cause. But I want to know, for you specifically, was there a moment in your life when you realized these issues were personal to you, not just academic?
I think more recently they became personal to me with the Gaza genocide
Mm.
because I was a lot younger when the war on terror started. So while I fundraised and things and advocated at my high school and in college, I was kind of in abstract opposed to what was going on at Guantanamo and in Abu Ghraib and things like that. But now that I'm older, and have lived in the real world for a while, insofar as a human rights lawyer even lives in the real world, I the Gazan genocide was the first time that I really thought about just the sheer waste that was involved of human
Mm.
potential, um, in Israel's bombing campaign against the Palestinians. And obviously, it's not just Gaza, it's the Sudan, it's Congo, it's Lebanon now, and Iran. And the Trump administration has really gone off the rails in terms of their indiscriminate advocacy in favor of war and this kind of machismo approach to diplomacy.
Right, exactly. And a lot of people just don't know how to address issues like that. And your work, helps combat that. And as our senior fellow, and can you explain to the our watchers, as our senior fellow, what does that role involve day to day?
So I have kept up my individual research, writing policy briefs with a legal emphasis, but I also have taken on additional responsibilities with the domestic militarization watch that you launched last fall, fall and winter. That's when I first became a senior fellow, and I became involved in monitoring the newer incoming fellows and kind of sharing responsibilities with you and Peru, our other fellow, senior fellow, and kind of coordinating, keeping an eye on them, answering questions. So that was a nurturing role that had been introduced that was kind of new for me. And I also personally have been maintaining a case law tracker for DMW, for Domestic Militarization Watch, in which we try to keep track of the cases against ICE and DHS and Kristi Noem, although I think is she out now? I don't remember. And Trump. So that's been very interesting. We have over 50 cases logged since last year um, that are either in process or that have been resolved.
What projects are you most excited about right now?
I'm pretty excited about the case law, but I really enjoyed my independent work this term, where I wrote a couple of briefs about domestic militarization and its legality, and then also our foreign interventions that have really been amped up during the Trump administration, Venezuela and Iran most specifically. So I did a lot of interesting research in those areas too.
Right. And you also mentioned that you have been deeply involved with Domestic Militarization Watch. Why is that project so important?
Well, the Trump administration, the second Trump administration, is unprecedented in its draconian and fascist approach to governance. And I'm saying this as someone who, as an adult, lived through the first Trump administration, which was already quite erratic and unhinged. But he truly appears to have taken the training wheels off this time. And it's not because he knows how to balance on a bike. So,
Right.
the domestic militarization watch is very relevant to me, and it's not just the work that I've been doing, all of the fellows. It's really interesting. I worked very closely with Amy Snyder, one of our other fellows, who did great work on a tracker of all the different ICE deployments and National Guard deployments across the country, which I thought was very interesting work. And all of this is on our website, as you know. All the different briefs we've been writing, Peru and me, and Maisie and Amy and other people. And we have a great team that we meet every Friday, as you know, and we kind of just discuss what's going on in the world. And it doesn't affect me directly yet, but I'm still personally offended by the way these detention centers are run and the way ICE is treating people. Just as a human being, I'm glad that we have at least enough agency in this country that we can publish what we publish in order to spread
Right.
awareness.
Right. Yes. And you all have been doing spectacular work on the site and making sure that our activists have the information they need in order to help people who are experiencing domestic militarization. And speaking of the word militarization, many Americans hear the term militarization, but may not know what it means domestically. How would you explain that in plain language?
So the way the Constitution is set up, there's a separation of powers. The military powers in the Constitution are mostly divided between the president and Congress, where Congress has the power to declare war and the president is commander in chief of the armed forces once an aggression has been initiated. But neither of these purviews is supposed to apply to domestic law enforcement. There is a police power in, I believe, the 10th Amendment, but that is very different from the rules that govern military engagements. So for the Trump administration to increasingly be deploying its own militia, which is what ICE is essentially, in US cities simply to police ethnicities that they resent for their participation in the labor force is, I mean, it's like nothing we've seen since
Right.
at least Jim Crow.
Yeah. And in addition to ICE, what other examples of military tactics, equipment, or mindsets are showing up in civilian life?
So the most notable one that jumps to mind that comes to my mind is there's a 1033 program in which military equipment is actually repurposed and distributed to police officers. So they're using surveillance technology from the military. They're using old equipment, guns and SWAT equipment for the police officers from the military. And it's also importing a military mindset into domestic law enforcement, which is absurd because military engagements, by their very nature and definition, are so different from the way law enforcement is supposed to operate within the United States, where the police are part of a community and are supposed to be enforcing laws that the community participates in, as opposed to a foreign aggression where there's, I mean, it's regrettable, but there is an inherent adversarial nature to it that should be absent from domestic law enforcement, which should be more about cooperation and resolution.
And, every day we hear arguments from people saying, well, this doesn't really impact me. And, 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 and if, and, and pre-qualifying this, thinking that this isn't a personal issue for them. Why should everyday people care about this issue?
Well, for one thing, the most utilitarian answer is because it eventually will affect you. I mean, with the murders of Renee Good and Alex Pretty, who were both U.S. citizens who were observing ICE activities, they weren't breaking the law. They weren't immigrants who were here unlawfully. They were both murdered by ICE simply for showing up to where ICE was committing atrocities and bearing witness. So it's already starting to affect people who you might not think of as inherently implicated in this kind of ethnic war that the United States, the Trump administration is launching against like Latinx people. But also, I feel like if you live in the United States as a patriot, our civil liberties are what define us or are supposed to define us as a country. And ironically, that's never been 100% true in our history. I mean, even the way the country was founded, it was a lot of lofty talk, but it wasn't a reality for Black people or Native Americans or later the Chinese working on the railroads. Or I think during the Great Depression also there was a crackdown on Mexican immigration. So there have always been qualifiers to the American dream, but I do think that is what makes this country great insofar as it has ever succeeded, like with the civil rights movement in the 60s, and the Civil War that ended slavery. So, I mean, I think the American dream is a work in progress, but it's every American's responsibility to build on it insofar as they are able, even if it only means voting your conscience and keeping people who are going to support this administration out of office. I mean,
Right.
we have a massive APAC and Jewish lobby problem in this country where this doesn't affect domestic militarization directly, but it affects the war in Palestine, it affects the war in Iran and Lebanon. We have all of these special interests that are buying our politicians and selling out, and then the politicians are in turn selling out wholesale to foreign countries. And it's not just Israel. I think the Saudi government and the UAE are also involved in conflicts like the Sudan RSF conflict. And there's just too much corrupt money in DC that is controlling what is supposed to be the purview exclusively of the people. So I feel like that should rouse indignation in everyone's soul.
Right, that we individually need to let politicians know
Yes.
how we feel about their decisions and that we are watching and we are voting.
Yes. And for now, voting is a power that we at least ostensibly do have in this country for whatever it's worth. So even
Mhm.
if people have legitimate, very legitimate concerns about taking a more active role or getting more involved, they can always vote their conscience. And voting in people like Mayor Mamdani and AOC and Bernie Sanders and Ruben Gallego, it really does make a difference.
It definitely does. And what trends are you watching right now that concern you most?
That's quite a menu. Um, let's see. I think what concerns me most at the moment is the fecklessness of our elected representatives. You know, this is not how this country was designed to operate with um, an unhinged, mentally incompetent leader doing whatever he wants based on social media tweets that he fires off at 2 a.m. when,
Right.
you know, I mean, President Obama wasn't perfect, President Biden wasn't perfect, but they took the office seriously.
Hmm.
I wish they had done more on Gaza, but that's a long list of people that we can wish of. But President Trump is my biggest concern right now because I don't think he's presidential in any way. And the people who are letting him get away with this, like they tried to force a vote on banning weapons to Israel. 40 Democratic senators did vote to ban, I think, bulldozers and certain types of bombs. Or tanks or something. And that's more than ever in history, but it still wasn't a majority. They tried to force a vote on the Iran war to get people to stop, and I think we lost by like one vote. And people were saying that even though only one Democrat was needed to turn it the other way, he probably spoke for a lot of people who didn't want to be on record as voting in favor of the war. And so they kind of just pushed one guy to do it so that it wouldn't pass and they would be safe, but they also
Right.
wouldn't look bad. So there's a lot of gutlessness in our current representation. And there are exceptions, like I said, Mamdani, Ro Khanna, people like that. But there aren't enough yet. So the power really does reside with the people right now to change that and to get these fat cats out of office.
Yeah. How does domestic militarization affect democracy, civil liberties, or community trust?
So, as a lawyer, I'm very sensitive to how it affects civil liberties because when the police start operating along a military mindset, the last thing they're thinking about is the Fourth Amendment or the Fifth Amendment or the Sixth Amendment or any of the Bill of Rights or the other amendments. And search and seizure, the right to counsel when you're being interrogated by the police, all these things, they are sacrosanct and they are hammered into you in law school. So I'm well aware of their importance. And furthermore, we are a blueprint for democracies across the world because of those things. And we're supposed to lead by example. And right now, we're really not.
Right. What do you think gets lost when governments prioritize force over care?
I think trust is the number one thing that gets lost because, I mean, we've been seeing this in impoverished communities for generations, um, like with gang violence in LA or in New York or other major
Mhm.
cities. It's always been a problem that the people with the least stake in the tax base are least represented or protected by the government. But domestic militarization has really turned the dial up to an unprecedented level where you can't rely on people to protect you who are abusing you. It's contrary to human nature. And the more the police use these detention centers and these brutality and profiling techniques, the more it erodes basic faith in the fabric of our society. So people are less
Exactly.
likely to cooperate with the police, even when their aims might be legitimate. And like I said, this isn't something that started with Trump. I mean, I live in LA and it's a very stratified city. There are some places of extreme wealth and even more of extreme poverty. And I think it's maybe more extreme here, but I think that's true of most major cities in the country. Not that that's specific to the United States, but the Trump administration has really almost in caricature illustrated a problem that is common to US democracy and has been since at least the Civil War. I mean, we didn't have these problems as much until they started sensing that minorities were gaining on them. I mean, college was free until ethnicity started enrolling in large numbers. So there is certainly a white fragility, racial anxiety component to what's going on. But it's not like
Right.
people had a huge amount of rights before. I mean, when the country was founded, poor European origin Americans had almost as few rights as minorities sometimes do today. So, but I think the real problem with the way the the police are operating now is that people pay taxes. I mean, undocumented immigrants pay more taxes than some corporations. And they're not, and they come to this country because we have, in many circumstances, ruined the circumstances of their countries of origin. And they come here for safety, and I sincerely doubt they feel safe anymore.
Exactly. If public dollars were redirected away from militarization, what would you rather see communities invest in?
That's a long list, but I would say education, healthcare, basic utilities, that sort of thing. I mean, we have more homes than we do homeless people, but so many of them are owned by hedge funds and venture capitalists that we have a massive housing crisis. So I would spend it on school lunches and community grocery stores, community gardens, things like that.
What have you learned through this fellowship that surprised you?
I've learned a lot of things that surprised me. Let's see. Let me come up with a good one. Well, one interesting thing that I learned about is that there's actually, bringing the conversation back to non-proliferation, there's actually a proposed treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. The United States is not currently a signatory to it, but it has been gaining traction in recent times. And I think I don't know if I'm going to see it ratified in my lifetime, but the more I have researched for PEP, the more I have become aware of just how unnecessary nuclear weapons are. And I think it would be a miracle, but a very good idea to implement the TPNW.
Okay, great. And what skills have you developed while working with Peace Economy Project?
I've never actually been in a supervisory role before in any professional capacity, so it has been very rewarding to work with the other fellows. I really enjoy that. I like when they come to me with their problems and when they have questions and I can answer them. So that's been a good learning experience for me. And I've learned different styles of writing and advocacy as well.
What keeps you hopeful when working on difficult topics?
Sometimes not much, but in general, I genuinely believe that the human genome does not tolerate the kinds of vagaries that people are subjecting other human beings to and have been since the dawn of agriculture, at least 10,000 years ago. Um, and racism, gender violence, all these things. I genuinely believe that our DNA and our biology revolt against these things. So I have
Mm.
to believe that the people who are perpetrating these horrible crimes against humanity, not least in the Epstein files, I have to believe that they are being held accountable by their own biology and are suffering for what they're doing, and that people eventually science will catch up with what we're doing and we'll start to incorporate analysis into, like, for example, I learned from one of our other fellows last term that the British used to starve South Asians during the colonial British Raj, and that legacy is still embedded in South Asian DNA in terms of how they process insulin and their rates of diabetes and stuff. I refuse to believe that when you rape someone or when you are racist towards people and violent towards them in your racism, that that doesn't record itself in your DNA and show up on your face and in your health and in your mental health. You know, racism really is a form of mental illness, and so is sexual violence. So, what keeps me hopeful is thinking, okay, our biology is not going to tolerate this forever. It's not the natural way of things. It's a nightmare from which we're struggling to awaken. And I sincerely believe that we have to wake up sometime.
I agree. What would you say to a young person who wants to work for justice but doesn't know where to begin?
Um, Honestly, I would suggest if it's in their power at all, well, first of all, read as much as you can. And not just from mainstream media, but alternative sources like Al Jazeera and the Atlantic. Well, the Atlantic's not really alternative, but it's more in depth than a lot of other mainstream news organizations. Just expand your horizons as much as you can. If it's at all within your power, I would recommend law school as a way to open your eyes. But I think you should take what people teach you there with a grain of salt because it is very mercenary the way it is approached in my experience. You learn a lot, but you don't want to compromise your ethics and your worldview simply in order to get ahead. And if they're looking for ways to get involved, obviously volunteering with an organization like PEP is a great way to manage your time and feel like you're making a difference while still maintaining your day job and your comfortable lifestyle.
And going along with that, would you suggest that's also how everyday people make a difference, even if they don't have policy experience?
Yes, absolutely. Um, I know we're not the only organization that does this kind of work, but I think PEP is a great place to start simply because of the flexibility that it offers. And I really do think the depth of our work is not reflected in our current size. Like we're deceptively small.
Yeah.
Um, but that's in no way a measure of like the great work I've seen other fellows do during my time here. And of course, we have you to thank for that. But organizations like PEP, I think, are a great way to stay involved and to contribute in a way that allows you to live your life, but also make a difference.
So what's next for you, and what are you most excited about?
Well, I am most excited right now about the trip that PEP is sending me on to DC to lobby for non-proliferation and against domestic militarization. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm going with, I believe, one of our board members or founding members, Marianne McGivern.
Yes.
I'm looking forward to that. And then more broadly, in the next year or so, I do plan to take the bar. Um, Probably California, depending on where I am in a year. But I'll most likely be in California. And unless I mean, even if I do find a full-time job elsewhere, I think I would like to use my services as a newly minted attorney to help PEP with some expanded advocacy goals.
And where can people follow Peace Economy Project's work and stay involved?
So there are a few places. There's the website on WordPress. We also have a great social media team. So you can follow us on Threads and maybe I don't know about X because I haven't found you guys there, but I'm assuming we're on X and also Instagram. Oh, we're not.
No, we're protesting X.
Oh, good, good. Even better. But we have a great stream on Instagram that I follow. And we also have a podcast on Spotify. So and now this YouTube channel.
Thank you so much for your time, Rashell. And as Rashell said, she's going to DC to talk about anti-nuclear proliferation soon. So make sure to support her work. And thank you for supporting Peace Economy Project. Without you, our work wouldn't be nearly as vital.
Thanks, Katrina.